Welcome to AI Shorts, the show where we talk about the intersection of machine learning and product management. In today's AI Shorts video, I'll show you how to create an LLM product, mixing prompt engineering with traditional programming in a hands-on demo. In the past 6 months, generative AI has become the latest rage in the AI community. It's reshaping the roles in the tech industry and redefining what it means to be a software engineer, a product manager, or a data scientist. That's why it's important to understand LLM's capabilities, their limitations, and their potential impact on society to stay ahead of the game. Large language models feel like magic, but they're actually statistical models trained on the corpus of the internet to predict the next word in a sequence. They capture the semantic relationships of the input data through a technique called self-attention. I don't have time to cover this in detail in this video, but I encourage you to read a great article by The Economist that describes this in detail, and I'll link to the article in the description section below. Okay, let's dive into our demo, and I'll show you how to create your own LLM products. So let's start with an overview of our LLM product, and we're calling this product AI Seuss. It's going to be a LLM that writes a children's story for us, and we're going to do 2 different versions of this. The first version is going to use APIs and gather some real-time data for us. We're going to grab real-time weather information and the current top news story, feed that into our LLM. It'll write an original funny story for us. We're going to feed that back into itself, and it'll come up with the story title. Then we're going to take the story title, feed it into a diffusion model. It'll create the artwork or the cover for our children's book. We'll save that as a PNG, and we'll save the story and the title as a JSON file. The second version of the product is going to be more of a chat experience where the user can provide input such as, should the story be about a girl or a boy? What's the child's name? What's the theme of the story? And should there be a moral, and what should that moral be? We'll feed all that information into the LLM, and it will come up with the story for us. So let's get started. Okay, so this is our Python notebook, and the first thing we'll do is import our libraries. We're going to use OpenAI today, so that's going to be the main LLM library that we use. I created a credentials Python file that contains all the different API keys that we're going to be using. So if you want to write this code, you just should create a Python file called credentials.py containing all your secret keys. The next set of libraries is for making API calls and processing the JSON files. pprint helps us print out dictionaries in a more pretty format than just the print command. And then the next set of libraries is for importing and saving images. And finally, panel is a UI interface for our chat. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is get our weather information, and I created a function here called getWeather that takes a city as an input, and it's going to return a bunch of weather information for us. The first thing we do is get our API key from our credentials file here, and then we're going to call our API endpoint, and we're using a website called openweathermap.org. They provide free weather information for major cities across the world, so you can go there and get a free API key if you want to try this out. And we are calling this URL together with the city that we're interested in, our API key, and we set the units to metric here. And it kicks back a JSON file with all kinds of interesting weather information. Most of that file is structured as a dictionary. Some of it is a list, so the first thing that we need to do is to get the weather information, we have to actually convert a list to a dictionary. So that's this first line here. And after that, we're just going to parse out different information. So the temperature, the weather, and the wind speed. We'll just call those different parts of the JSON file. And the next set of code is about trying to describe what the weather feels like. So we're going to send text to our LLM. And instead of sending numbers, I want to describe what these temperatures feel like. So all these temperatures are in Celsius, and I can describe them either as hot, warm, cool, or cold, or freezing with this if-else statement. And we're doing the same thing for the wind speed. So the wind comes back as meters per second. We'll describe it as stormy, strong, breezy, or a light breeze. And then we're going to return the weather, the temperature description, wind speed description, temperature, and wind speed from this function. So let's try this out. Let's load our libraries first. and then we'll load our weather function. And let's try this out. So I live in Chicago. We'll use this as our test city, and we are going to send Chicago to our function here and return all of these variables. And we'll print out what we get. So the weather in Chicago is clouds and the temperature is warm, 22 Celsius, and the wind is breezy at about 6-7 meters per second. So cool. Looks like that works. The next thing we'll do is grab our news headline. We have a get news function here. And the first thing we do is call our API key. We're going to use a service called newsapi.org. You can sign up here and get your free API key. It basically gives you a list of the 30 most important headlines of the day. And we're just going to grab one of those stories. So we call our API, and it's going to return back a JSON file. And we have to parse that as well. And here I'm going to grab the 6th story from our news. We're calling this real-time news, this variable. And we were basically creating a dictionary out of that story. So from there, we need to parse out the title, the news description, the news author, and the news URL. So let's do that. Let's load that function, and then we're going to call it get news, and we're going to load these variables. And we'll print out what the top story is. So today's top story is the Kremlin's truce with Wagner chief appeared to hold after his forces withdrew from a regional military headquarters. Okay, so it's just describing what's going on in Russia at the moment, and we'll try to make a children's story out of this, so this should be a lot of fun, and let's see what we get. Okay, the next section is we're going to actually start calling our LLM model now. And like I said, today we're going to use OpenAI's LLM. You can use, there's a lot of other ones out there too, some free open source ones, so feel free to use them. You don't have to use the OpenAI one. If you do want to use the OpenAI one, you can head over there, create a free account, set up your API keys, and I think they give you 3 months for free, $18 in credits, which lasts a long way in terms of calling their models. So I highly recommend you sign up and try it out. So we're going to define a helper function here. And the reason we do this is because we don't want to rewrite the same code over and over again as we call our model. This is going to save us lots of lines of code. So our function is called GCFM_GPT3, and we're sending it the variables or the parameters messages, the model type, we're using GPT 3.5 Turbo. The temperature, this is basically how random you want the answer to be. So if we set it to 0, it's going to give us the same answer every time. If we set it to 1, it is going to have a lot of randomness and creativity in its response. And the final parameter is max tokens. So a token, for this conversation, let's pretend that a token is basically a word. That's not quite true in reality. A word can consist of several tokens, but just to kind of simplify your mental model, think of it as the number of words that we're inputting into our LLM. Okay, and then we're going to call the OpenAPI method here, chatCompletion.create, and we're using all these input parameters that we just went over, and then we're going to return the response. So let's load that helper function. And now we're going to call the LLM model to write our story. So the first thing we do is load our API key here, and we're going to start interacting with the LLM. And let me show you how we do that. So we can interact with the LLM at the system or the assistant level. At the system level, that's where we set the behavior and the tone of the assistant. If we interact with the assistant, this is where we do our prompt engineering and ask it a set of questions. We tell it to do something, and it's going to send us a response. So let's look at our system information. So we're going to say, you are an assistant who responds in the style of Dr. Seuss. You have a silly sense of humor like a 10-year-old child. And for the user content, we're going to say, write me a children's book in the style of Dr. Seuss about, and we'll include our news description. And then we'll also say, also include that the weather is, and we'll include the temperature description, and we'll tell it what the sky is, and we'll tell it, what the wind speed is. And it'll try to work that into our message. So let's run that, and this is the user content message that we got. that we created. Write me a children's book in the style of Dr. Seuss about the Kremlin's truce with the Wagner chief, blah, 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 blah. So we blended all the real-time data that we've already captured. Then we're going to put these two these two variables together in a dictionary here for our messages. And then we'll call the model with the messages, and we're going to set the temperature to 1 because we want to get a really creative response. And let's print out our response. Okay, so let's check this out. So here's the story that it came up with. Once upon a time in Russia, not far away, the Kremlin and the Wagner chief were at fray. For years they battled with not much luck. But then something happened that changed their luck. So you can see this is a pretty creative little story here, and you can see that it works. It's the weather information in here as well. The weather was warm, the sky full of clouds, and the wind was breezy, rustling through the crowds. Yeah, good stuff. So I think the product that we created here was maybe geared more towards adults, but it's a fun and creative way of showing how you can use real-time information to create stories about it. So let's create a title from this. We're going to take this story and we're going to feed it back into our model. And we're going to tell our LLM, can you come up with a title for this children's story? And we'll send it back there. So let's see what we get. And the title it comes up with is The Tale of Peaceful Russia, How a Truce Was Formed and Hearts Were Won. So that sounds like a really sweet story. Well, I wonder what the cover of a children's story like this would look like. So we are going to take this title and we are going to send this to DALL-E 2, which is a diffusion model. And the prompt that we're going to give is a children's book cover for a book called The Tale of Peaceful Russia. And here, this is how many images you want it to return, and this is the size of the image. So it's going to kick back a URL for the image for us, and then we're going to take that URL and we are going to save it as a PNG here within our Python environment. Okay, so here is the image that it came up with. Kind of maybe some Russian-inspired children's art. Pretty creative, a little creepy, but definitely fun. Okay, so that was kind of an experience where we don't have any interaction with the LLM. Let's create a chatbot type experience where the user can have more control over the story and give more input to it. So in order to create an experience like this, we need to have memory of the conversation. And the problem is that LLMs, they don't have any memory. So in order to help the LLM remember the conversation, we are going to save all the prompts from the user and all the response from our assistant and feed them back into our LLM model. And that's what this helper function does right here. So you can see that we're appending the user messages, we're appending the role messages as we're sending them back into our model there. So let's load that. And now we're going to get into the prompt engineering. So the first two lines here, these are just to kind of fire up our UI. The next part here is our system message. So we're saying, you are a funny assistant who responds in the style of Dr. Seuss. This is just the same as before. But then we're going to give it a set of 5 different steps to follow. So we say, execute these tasks in the following order. You introduce yourself as AI Seuss and ask if the user would like this story to be about a girl or a boy, and wait for a response. Next, ask them the name of the girl or the boy, and wait for the user response. Next, ask them what they would like the story to be about, and make suggestions based on popular children's book themes. After that, we ask it should ask the user if there should be a moral to the story, and if so, what should that moral be? And then finally, we ask it to write the story itself, and we tell it that it should respond with a friendly and whimsical tone. So those are the system instructions here, and the code down here. This is code for the UI to our chat experience. So let's run this and try it out. Hello there, I'm AI Seuss, here to create a story for you. Would you like the story to be about a boy or a girl? Let's make it about a boy. Fantastic, a boy it is. Now, how about we give the boy a name? What would you like to name him? Let's call him Eric. Eric it is. Now, let's think about what the story should be about. Would you like it to be about animals, a far-off land, or perhaps a magical creature? Or maybe you have something else in mind. Let me know what you're thinking. Okay, let's say Eric wanders into the woods to pick blueberries and meets magical creatures along the way. Okay, wonderful choice. And what about the moral of the story? Do you think there should be one? If so, what should it be? So let's respond. Don't eat too many blueberries. So let's see, here we go. Eric ventured into the woods one summer day to seek out the freshest blueberries on his way. The forest was calm, so he whistled a tune until he happened upon a clearing, and what a sight to behold soon. For in the center there stood a tree so grand, with a trunk so tall you could barely see its end, and scattered round were the fairest things, magical creatures with wings. All right, I won't read the whole thing, but you can see it comes up with a nice little story for us here. So we're going to do the same thing, feed this back into our LLM, and have it come up with a title for us. Eric's Blueberry Adventure, a tale of moderation and magic in the woods. I like it. That's going to sell a lot of copies. Let's save the story for us. And what we can do here is we can ask the LLM to create a JSON object for us based on our previous conversation. It's going to save that story to a key called story and a title to a key called title. And so we're going to call our LLM with that message. And what it actually returns is a string that resembles a JSON object. So we need to transform that string first to a dictionary and then save it as a JSON file. So we're going to do that with this code here. We are going to look for the curly brackets here and create a start and end index. And then we're basically just going to truncate that string here. Then we will use the JSON library to transform the string into a JSON file. Here's a file path, and we're going to save the JSON file down here. So let's run that code and do that. Okay, let's take a look at the JSON file that we created using the pprint function here. And you can see that we have a JSON file, we have our story here, and we have the title down here at the bottom. And if we look at the data type down here, it's a dictionary as we would expect. I hope you enjoyed this video and you saw how easy it is to start creating your own LLM product. Today I showed you a simplified version of prompt engineering where I gave the LLM instructions and I got a response. Real prompt engineering involves chaining many LLMs together to solve complicated tasks. LangChain is a powerful new tool that allows you to do just that and much more. We'll look at LangChain and other open source tools in a future video and look at more advanced use cases. Leave your thoughts on LLMs in the comments below and give me a big thumbs up if you like this video. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.